Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining the Clallam EDC Coffee Chat, Coffee with Colleen. We are really excited to have our Clallam Economic Alliance lobbyist, Josh Weiss, on with us today. And we also happen to have Representative Theringer joining us too, so he might give some comment as well as we go along. And we will have Josh present in just a moment, but if you'll keep yourself on mute so we don't pick up any background noise, that would be great. And then also, if you have any questions, we love for this to be interactive, and I'm sure Josh will open it up for questions as well. So feel free to raise your hand virtually or put your question in the chat if you'd prefer that I ask the question on your behalf. So with that, I will go ahead and let Josh take it away. Josh, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, glad to be here, Colleen, and nice to see everybody, especially you, Representative Theringer. So, as Colleen mentioned, I'm the lobbyist since 2020 for what is now the Clallam Economic Alliance, and that, just as a quick refresher, includes the EDC, the county, the port, the two chambers of commerce, the Port Angeles Business Association, the PUD and
And
Port
and
Angeles.
we have invited all tribes to join in for input as well. They don't always join us. They're just really strapped, I think, with a lot of things that they do, but we do always invite them.
So let's see. I've talked to this group before, and I think it was only a couple of months ago. So I think I'm gonna, unless people have specific questions, I'm gonna sort of move on from the 2026 session, other than to say it was the first session that the CEA was working in this manner, with it, not in the form of the North Olympic Legislative Alliance. And it was I think from our perspective, a really successful legislative session. Um, Partially and largely because of support from our delegation in the 24th district.
Sorry, Josh, I muted you by accident.
There we go.
Okay, there we go. Sorry.
I'm not sure. I think what I was saying, we really put our emphasis behind two capital projects, the Port of Port Angeles' multi-user marine facility building, which was successful in receiving $2 million in the capital budget, which was awesome, and then $3.3 million for the lower Elwha Clallam Tribe wastewater line extension in the city of Port Angeles' western urban growth area, which has a variety of multiple uses, including connecting to the tribe's health center, but also connecting out for economic development near the airport there. Um, so really great projects. We did extremely well in the capital budget this year. Representative Theringer probably has a lot more context in this, but this was one of the smaller capital budgets that I've seen. It's one of the first times I've seen a capital budget actually get smaller than the biennium before, and that was because of pressure from the operating budget. Um, and just other jurisdictions I work with across the state, we were one of, if not the most successful. So that was really great to see. And I think a large part of that obviously is our delegation, but also just the fact that we had all these organizations coming together, including that tribal support and tribal participation, I think was really compelling for legislators. Um, so I'm going to jump in and talk a little bit about for this upcoming session. So last fall, CEA really kind of had to hit the ground running because we were transitioning from NOLA. Didn't have a whole lot of time to think about legislative priorities for 26, and so we sort of built it while we were flying. This year it's a little different. We have some time to get ready for 2027. Colleen, what's the
Yeah, you talked about how the capital budget was smaller. Can you quantify that, or can Steve quantify it? Like how big have they normally been? And then what was it last year relative to prior years based on some of that funding needing to go to support the operating budget? And how
yeah,
much went to support the operating budget?
I can. Let me look it up. The number that comes to my head, and Representative Theringer, please feel free and correct me if you have a different view on any of this, but the number six in my head is like $4 billion less. Um, and that really was because there was a significant shift. I'm not finding my notes here. Um, a shift in items like the Public Works Assistance account. There was a fair amount of carbon money that was otherwise dedicated to capital projects that was shifted over. In fact, one of the things that happened was there were programs like the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan, the Chehalis Basin Plan. They were previously funded by bond revenue out of the capital budget. They got shifted over to Climate Commitment Act dollars, so they're now no longer funded by those bond dollars. Um, so those were a couple of the items. And Representative Theringer, I don't know if you want to emphasize any of those moves.
Well, I think the historically, if you look over like a 15 or 20-year period, the capital budget's around 5 billion, right, in bonds. And that's based on, there's a formula based on money that comes into the general fund, what is it, general fund near term. So, and then you can't exceed 10% of that, right? And then we usually, I think it's about a 7% number we usually use. It varies a little bit, but the average is right around, 5 billion. And then over the last few years, during COVID and with CCA, it is increased. I think that the highest was maybe 9 billion. I think we had one year it was like 9 billion. If you added all the IIJA and ERA, IRA money and all that, and then CCA kicked in over the last couple of years. But what's happened in the budget process is both of the three budgets, operating capital and transportation, the transportation budget is really underwater. And so the CCA money and some of the bond money from the capital side has gone in to kind of keep those projects going. And of course, the operating budget is also in trouble. So, we're getting closer to an average over a longer time span capital budget than we've had over the last maybe 6, 8 years.
So when you say, Representative Theringer, keeping those projects going, does that mean funding the payments from the bonds from the capital budget, or is it
No,
just a one time?
yeah, it means in transportation, it means completing, projects that have been started. And so having enough money to, yeah, complete them. So it really
Okay.
relates to the projects themselves. It's not just the bond issues. So.
So when you do a bond for capital budgets, how long are those bonds paid back?
So it's interesting because it's about a 20-year cycle, but what happens is, you have, say, a $5 billion capital budget, right? But it takes time for the projects within that budget to need that money. So the treasurer sort of manages the bond sales depending on the demand of those projects. And I think the bond sales are usually around I think a quarterly time frame. And so of that 5 billion, say they would only bond out about, on the market, maybe a billion of that, or not even that much, depending on what the activity is. And, as the time sort of elapses and people get their projects, ready to go, like a big housing project, for example, or a restoration project, then the treasurer, goes out and sells the bonds.
Got it.
So and that's when, obviously the debt starts to incur, but I think it's a 20-year cycle. And the
Okay.
treasurer's done a pretty good job of refinancing some of those bonds at different interest rates. Not right now, well, right now it's not too bad, but, watching those markets and taking some of the older bonds that are at a higher rate and putting them into a tranche that's a lesser percentage.
Got it.
So there,
Thank you.
so we appropriate, and the treasurer sort of manages depending on what the demand is from when the projects come to, maturity for the need for the funding.
tomorrow I'm heading down to Portland for a four-state conference with the treasurers of each state where they're working on something called For the Long Term, where they're talking about different policies that they're trying to get passed in different states. One of them, they're talking about the challenges and potential around like Washington Saves and some of the different bonding things. So it should be interesting. I'm a little concerned that I'm a panelist and I don't know why I'm a panelist though. So I've got to figure out
Because you
what
know,
the hell I'm going to say.
because you know stuff. I mean, it is interesting to watch. There's been some discussion because Moody's said that the state kind of put a warning. We have this AAA rating, which is pretty solid, and it's been as long as I've been in the legislature, had that rating, which is the highest rating, which really makes the money less expensive, right? But they, in their statement, they said they're concerned, and they've always been concerned, about if we're using reserves or what our balances are and sort of, spending related to income. But they also, one of the things they've always mentioned is in Washington, the initiative process. Because back when Iman was, pretty active, those initiatives would impact our revenue, and that was an unknown. The bond raters do not like any, unknowns. They want everything very predictable. And so that was a variable that hurt our bonding. And that's what happened with this message from Moody's is they're concerned, you know, about the millionaire's tax because the millionaire's tax has been booked into the revenue picture going forward. And of course, it's going to be on the ballot in November. And so that's a variable that bond companies do not like, bond raters don't like. And that was part of the statement. So that's one of the surprise to me anyway that that's one of the factors that they have concerns about, the folks that are rating the bonds. But because we have such a strong pension system and the funding in our pension system is so solid compared to a lot of other states, that keeps our bond rating pretty, AAA.
Got it. Thank you.
Always awesome to have somebody who knows what's actually going on in a conversation like this. I did you by way of Representative Theringer. You knew off the top of your head what I was looking for in my notes. Yeah, this capital budget was $4 billion less than the last biennial capital budget, and that completely makes sense about the federal funding coming in and that sort of bulge, if you will. The other shift was in capital gains revenue, right? There's like 300, almost $400 million in capital gains revenue that otherwise comes into the capital budget that was shifted over to the operating budget for this biennium. So I think that's one of the major things for 2027 that folks like me and others will be watching is sort of what's the impact as the operating budget continues to struggle. What is the impact on capital budget, transportation budget? There's just a lot of uncertainty, I think, for this next upcoming session.
Yeah, Josh, if I could, on the capital gains funding. So the way it's structured is the first 500 million goes into early learning, I think, and then after that it was supposed to go into capital, and they just didn't allow that. They just swept it into operating. So that was the deal.
Right, and that'll be a risk this next session, I would think,
Yes.
and any session going forward. We've had this ongoing conversation, right, Representative Theringer, you and I and others about the Public Works Assistance Account, which is a similar situation where you've got this pot of cash sitting there that's just for operating budget writers is just too tempting in these tough budget situations not to look at as a way to help with the problem. And that's an interesting point about the capital gains revenue that otherwise would go in capital budget. So I'm going to continue on, Colleen, but please do you or others please interrupt with questions or Representative Theringer, if you have comments. I think that's always valuable. And I am usually pretty good at getting back from a direction I was headed. So the 27 session, I think I already mentioned, we are concerned about operating budget balances, basically revenues not being able to be available for what we project as the ongoing cost of doing government in the state. Um, I don't, it's hopefully not going to be bad as the Great Recession, but it is definitely going to be a smaller budget in the operating side. And that will mean cuts out of certain programs. I think it's going to be a really hard process for the legislature to figure out how to do that. Um, I do, as I advise my clients, at least at this point in the session, I'm real or summer, I'm saying, you know, don't be making operating budget requests. There might be opportunities in the capital budget, and not really transportation opportunities unless the legislature decides to tackle some replacement revenue source for gas tax, which is a diminishing revenue source and is traditionally what the transportation budget has largely been built on. And will the road usage charge, which has been proposed in the House for at least two biennia, maybe more, but has never gotten, obviously all the way across the finish line. Will something like that actually come forward? And we've talked about that actually on these coffee chats before when I've come forward. It's certainly something that's under consideration.
So, and the big problem around the road usage tax is that people's miles would be monitored on their cars that they're
Well,
driving.
the I think most recent proposal actually had people self-reporting or gave the option for self-reporting. So it would be much, I think, less intrusive, as part of the reason for doing that. The original pilot that the Transportation Commission did was based on a tracker that was on your car. For obvious reasons, people really got, when they heard about that as a possible option, people were not very excited about that. And so they went to this self-reporting option. So I think that is one of the major discussion points, from my perspective, that still needs to get resolved.
And right now, electric vehicles, they have to pay a annual fee, is that right? Okay.
Think it's an annual surcharge, yeah.
Okay. But
Yeah,
that
but that
doesn't make up enough money compared to the gas tax.
correct.
So
Yeah.
why don't they just raise that? Because they don't want
Uh,
to disincentivize people from buying EVs?
I haven't tracked it that closely. I'm not sure if Steve has thoughts on that. I think that's probably right, as they don't want to be disincentivizing, but also, um, there is there is a psychological factor. I know when you think about fees versus taxes and how you raise revenue, that paying one lump sum per year
Yep.
is pretty psychologically impactful, right? When it's a large charge as opposed to a few dollars at the gas pump. Um, Although, the recent conversation in the state about gas prices really has people thinking about that. But I'm sure that's been part of it, is paying a few $1,000s a year one time is harder than, a few dollars here and there.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's a real paradigm shift, right? For people to think about how they pay for the impacts of their vehicles and the infrastructure. And, it's probably one of the bigger policy discussions that in the state, um,
Yeah.
in the next 10 years or so.
I bet if Inslee were still governor, he'd be saying, no way are you going to charge people driving EVs. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
see Paul says tax on EVs also applies to hybrids. Yeah, because they don't use
Yep.
nearly as much gas. And
Right.
that, I mean, he wanted to incentivize electric vehicle drivers and penalize fossil fuel driven vehicles. And so, yeah, a road usage fee doesn't do that.
Incentivize and disincentivize. Um, Yeah, I mean the what you're trying to get to, and right, Washington doesn't have as robust or as built out of a tolling system as other places in the country and other places in the world. But what you're really trying to get to is having people pay sort of their fair share for how much they use the road. That is, the other thing about EVs and hybrids is they're a lot heavier because of the batteries, and they have a bigger impact on road, uh, just degradation on the roads. Um, so that's not factored in when you're paying gas tax either. Um, yeah, so those are some of the factors that are going into this conversation.
So the city of Squim got how many millions of funding for the Simdars interchange? Something like 30 or more.
That
Um,
sounds about right.
yeah, to finish off the Simdars interchange. It was never finished in its original design in the 90s, I think it was. I don't have all this exactly right, but that was part of the wasn't complete streets, the big act, the big transportation bill that was
Move
17
ahead, Washington.
move ahead Washington bill that passed maybe 6 years ago. And
Mhm.
so none of these numbers are quite right. But uh, so, and all these different projects were part of the Move Ahead Washington bill, and Simdars was part of that. And the big question was, when would you get your project in the pipeline to be completed? And as I understand it, Squims is pretty far back in the transportation plan for the state. And with prices that have skyrocketed, um, to, include the culverts that what doubled in price, just about, I think. Um,
Well,
Go ahead.
project
Correct me.
prices have skyrocketed generally, not just culverts.
Yeah. So, and that was, what was that? Yeah, it was 17 billion available for X many projects, and now they don't have enough money for all these projects. So to me, it seems like it's not just a timing issue of when do you get your project done, but does the state have enough money to complete the Simdars project if it's at the end of the long laundry list of projects to be completed?
Those are exactly the right considerations and dynamics, Colleen. It even actually, you can go back to the transportation package before, which was Keep Washington Rolling,
Okay.
and it was probably 5 years before. Um, and we even were running into the same dynamic where just project costs increase. And there's some assumption in it, in a transportation budget about inflation. The issue has been is, it's not just for state transportation projects, but for all projects, infrastructure projects across the state, that inflation has just been higher than what was projected. So even with that original package in Move Ahead Washington, you had to have some resources dedicated to the last tranche of projects um, that were, uh, money was provided for those projects to get finished. So one of the things that was different about this last supplemental transportation budget that they passed was they actually allowed for projects that are in what's called WashDOT's local programs, which are the projects that get done sort of through local governments. Is they allowed WashDOT to use the working capital, if you will, for those local projects if they were not getting done on schedule. So allowed the agency to sort of come in and use the cash flow um, for those local projects. So I think, in the last few months, that's sort of again, a new paradigm for local governments to be like, look, we got to be out getting these dollars spent. Otherwise, they're going to get sort of swept into the agency. And that will be one of the dynamics in the transportation budget to continue watching over the next session and next couple of biennia, I think. Every It is a cash flow problem at a certain point, right? There's the overall availability of was the package sufficient for all the projects that were committed? And then how do you roll out the cash in a way that you can get the projects done um, so you don't overdraw your bank account? And I think probably everybody on this call wouldn't be surprised or knows that with a transportation budget, one of the ways it's politically possible to raise gas taxes, at least in the past, is individual legislators will want to see projects in their district to be able to justify their vote for a revenue package. And, I think we've seen a lot of commitments in the last two transportation budgets in order to get those votes. Um, so yeah, lots about the transportation budget there.
And who of our legislators, let's see, uh, Adam Birnbaum, if he's reelected, he will be, he's on the transportation committee. But Senator Chapman is not any longer. Is that right?
He was.
He
There's an
was.
there here might remember. I thought that he was still. Maybe he moved off. Uh,
Yeah, I think he has moved off in the Senate. He was, but now I think because of his chairmanship of natural resources, I think. Um, but as we've always tried as a team, Team 24 to have someone on transportation in one of the chambers, because so that we could track stuff. And we've really worked hard to get money for that Cinders Road, but the challenge is it's really an economic development project to have people have access, be able to, it adds the cloverleaf so that they can get on going west onto 101 from the east side of town. And quite frankly, that's not a high priority. What really drives projects is, I'm sorry, is fatalities.
Mhm.
And but we're trying to get a service road in between Happy Valley and and Simdars and make that work. But that's just been a challenge.
In the south side of the highway, right? Palo
Right,
Alto,
right,
Happy Valley, back to Simdars
right.
to,
Trying to do that all together with the cloverleaf, but it's
yeah.
it just doesn't raise on the criteria doesn't bring it up to the high priority.
There have been a lot of fatalities, though, coming off of Palo Alto. I remember maybe 20 years ago, 5 kids died, teenagers, like right after graduation, died
Yeah,
right
it's
there in
definitely a
the
dangerous
service.
area, no
Yeah,
question about it. Yeah.
yeah.
So that's why we've been able to move it up, but it's still, we're not, I don't think we're quite there yet.
Okay. Interesting. Thank you.
So one of the things that the CA group is talking about this interim as we start to think about the 27 session and our priorities, and we've only had a couple of initial meetings, and one of the things that I really want to do sooner rather than later is sit down with all the members of the 24th and really make sure that we're lined up with items that they can feel good about championing. But this is the perfect segue. One of the main topics that has come up so far is Highway 101. And really what we're thinking so far is a multi-pronged sort of legislative ask to make sure that the legislature has and WashDOT have front of mind regarding Highway 101 that it is a critical freight corridor. Um, we've been thinking about this. I said multi-pronged. There is still concern, and I know you all know that concern about having further roundabouts on Highway 101 and what the impact would be for freight transport. So that's sort of one angle. The other is potentially asking for, or maybe the way to say it is highlighting a package of local transportation projects that would enable and be consistent with moving traffic and freight on 101. Moving up funding for SIMDARS would be one of those. Um, some conversation around frontage roads. Um, and Representative Erringer's probably cringing as I say, talking about new projects because just the transportation budget is in such tough shape. But my attitude on this is that you need to have projects that are in front of legislators to indicate that you have ideas, you are ready to go in the event that a conversation around new transportation resources and new projects starts. Um, because if you don't have your list and that conversation starts, it's really hard to get it going when you have the opportunity. Um, and then the third aspect of that is seeing whether or not we can get some sort of feasibility study about what actually it would take to expand 101 to 4 lanes and designate it as a freight corridor. Frankly, is almost as much as a sort of messaging and PR signal that this is the value and the importance of the highway for the area. Maybe not as much about, the idea that the study, the information or the data is critical to that, but it's a way to have that conversation. So I would say that transportation and 101 in Sundars is all very high on the group that has been meeting as CEA, and seems likely to be something that they're going to want to continue to talk about with legislators, whether it's a direct ask for resources this next session or just making sure it's in the queue. Sort of pause there, make sure. Oh, the other angle on this too was there's some conversation around the Railroad Avenue waterfront, right there in Port Angeles, from the Blackball terminal to the pier, um, emphasizing the point that that is an international freight arterial coming from across from Victoria. This the group recognizes is not a project that's ready to go, but starting to raise that issue is part of the strategy. A little bit related, there's also conversation around getting seaplane docks that are actually permitted and planned already, but there's need for construction funding, and thinking that that would have some tourism and economic development benefit for the region. And that would be a capital budget request for the construction. Let's see, a couple of the other items that have been discussed so far. I think we're anticipating that the community college system could really be targeted for potential reductions in the operating budget, and knowing that Peninsula College is already making reductions, and just the importance that institution plays for workforce development in the local area. And to the degree that the community and the CEA members can come around the college and sort of help protect the college from, specifically Peninsula College, from reductions where the rest of the system might be getting targeted.
Yeah, Josh, I'd like to underscore that because as one of the things with the operating budget, there are certain things that are, guaranteed. You got to pay the debt, you got to pay K-12 is, constitutionally paramount duty. But community colleges and higher ed are not. That's why they face the budget writers' knives. And they're going to continue to take cuts and so I think that's very important to focus on trying to sustain them. And what's interesting, is Peninsula, is kind of the baccalaureate place for the North Peninsula, right? Or the higher ed, institution. And, in Shoreline and Edmonds and Everett, there's all those community colleges and they're kind of condensed. So it's not as much of an impact, but out here it's a huge impact. So I think that the case needs to be made for the regional aspect of Peninsula, even though its enrollment is low, and then they look at enrollment and graduation and that sort of thing. I think the fact that it's in it's sort of the only game in town is an important argument and need to underscore that because it's not protected in any way. Higher ed's not protected in any way from the budget writers.
That's really awesome for you to hear you say that, because I didn't want to put you on the spot, but that was actually one of the questions I kind of had in my mind. Is I've heard it, the CEA group has characterized it like that. They've said, look, I think we really need to make our argument that this is the higher education institute for the region, and it's more important for the region than some of those other colleges in urban areas where you have not only other community colleges, but universities. And, there's other options for kids in those regions. The other aspect too that's been highlighted is just the service that it provides to tribal students, students that are tribal members, which is a little bit unique in the region too. So thanks for providing that.
It is. Peninsula College is the only college of the 34 community and technical colleges in the state that doesn't have a geographical overlap at all. And so that makes it pretty unique. It's also the smallest college in the state. And which also makes it, fairly unique. And if you talk to Dr. Ames, she talks about how it really was not a priority under the Inslee administration. Community and technical colleges weren't, that it would, in his administration, they wanted much more funding going to the four-year universities, especially UW and Wazoo. And a lot of money went there and not during that 12-year period to the community and technical colleges. And she's got a whole list of why, they're so challenged today, and they really are.
Is Governor Ferguson's wife, doesn't she teach at community college? Or
I don't know. It sounds right.
yeah,
Yeah.
that might help.
Might. Yeah.
We'll
Every
take
little
every
bit.
angle we can get.
That's a good point.
Um, a couple of other items there the group is talking about. Um, it sounds like the Port of Port Angeles. Um, there's a building up by the airport that they intend to lease to Port Angeles Composites, or is leased to Port Angeles Composites, that can be expanded, that would allow additional job creation. Port Angeles Composites would bring more employees in. There's a lot of investment that is intended there, and so asking the state to come in and help with a little bit of that construction cost again in the capital budget is one of the items. It sounds like, and I see Catherine's on as well,
Yeah.
Catherine Fraser, sounds like that is going to be moving forward. CEA's just sort of got it in our list of possible items.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
Catherine,
can.
you want to share? Thank you.
Yeah, I can add just a little bit more color commentary to that. Port Angeles Composites is coming in, and this is a huge job creation project, as Josh mentioned. So a really good fit for what the governor's budget and what the legislative capital side looks at. We are essentially taking one of our large industrial buildings at our composites manufacturing campus and doing some upgrades to make it ready for Port Angeles Composites. They're going to be doing aircraft manufacturing in that space. And so we have a good amount of square footage. We just need to do some upgrades and actually connect two buildings so they can come in. This is kind of the first step of the process. There's huge expansion opportunities after we get this first building done and Port Angeles Composites in the area. So we really see this as kind of like I said, the first step towards a really large expansion and job creation engine up at our composites manufacturing campus. So we're hoping to be able to get some interest in that. We've got a couple of different opportunities for funding, but certainly state funding is the clearest path forward. And yeah, we're excited to have Clallam Economic Alliance's support. And as we keep going with this project, we're happy to provide updates to this group.
Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, and the owner of Port Angeles Composites is well capitalized. They want to invest with a lot of equipment. They just need the right building structures, and so that's where the port would step in and lease that to them. So we're hoping, but the port we just went through our budget issues yesterday, and we've got lots of demands, and it's a challenge to say the least. The port's losing $177,000 a month right now, which is not sustainable. So we're trying to generate more revenue and figure out how we handle that situation going forward.
Yeah, this project would certainly help us balance out some of the economic challenges and market challenges that we're dealing with. So,
and diversify our revenue streams.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Two other items that have come up, just quickly mention. One is from the county has put on the table the impact on our local emergency response rescue teams because of individuals that come from out of the region and want to go up to the national park and then get in trouble out there and need to get rescued. And that's all paid at a local level. This is an issue that I've heard other jurisdictions talk about as well, Skamania County in particular, which is down by Mount St. Helens and along the Columbia Gorge. They have a similar issue. And it's really taxing both on local individuals that are involved in those rescues, but also on local resources. And so we're
Isn't it
talking.
mostly fire districts, Josh, that
Um,
are bearing the weight of those costs?
I don't think it's exclusively fire districts. I think it depends
Okay.
on which jurisdiction you're in, who sort of
Okay.
takes the lead on emergency response. Um,
Okay.
so there's some talk about whether or not the legislature would allow a hotel tax, basically, um, that in rural counties that are a gateway for state and federal recreational areas. And I've worked on hotel taxes different times in my career, and it's always controversial and difficult. Um, but where you have a direct connection like this to uh, basically hospitality industry and people coming in from out of the state, there seems like there's a pretty good nexus. So that's something we're talking about. And then I'll just say the last issue that we're discussing and don't know where exactly it goes is the impact on county trust lands, forest lands that are in trust managed by the Department of Natural Resources for the county and junior taxing districts, and just the social pressure that is out there to not have those lands managed for commercial production is really having a fiscal impact. It's uniquely felt in Clallam County, but there are other counties that are dealing with it as well. And there's a variety of conversations that are happening about this. Um, but this is something that the Economic Alliance has really identified as something that we should continue to weigh in on. Actually, the Alliance last year weighed in on legislation that would have um, added a tribal representative to the State Board of Natural Resources, which is the entity that makes decisions about timber sales. Um, One of the things that we've talked about is really in passing is, are there opportunities to partner with tribes as potential managers of these trust lands because they have greater social license than it seems like state agencies even do at this point. Um, I guess my point just being that this is not an anti-tribal issue whatsoever. It's just, there's already so much pressure and difficulty for the state to live up to that fiduciary responsibility that it feels like something dramatic needs to change in the dynamic, or this um, economic trust is going to continue to be whittled away. So, and I know Commissioner Johnson is on the line. He probably doesn't want to talk, but he represents counties on the Board of Natural Resources and is just completely engaged in this topic. And it's great. Clallam County and counties in general are well represented there. But so that's one of the topics we've been talking about as well. That's kind of where we are just in terms of idea generation and vetting. We have a meeting next week to continue to sort of vet and winnow and see if there's other ideas. I mentioned before that I would like to, before too long, get in front of all three of the legislators from the district and have more detailed conversations about what looks viable and what maybe isn't. That's a challenge this year for us because we have Representative Theringer retiring and we're not quite sure who's going to be in that seat. But that's a logistical issue and we'll work through that. So that's kind of what I wanted to share, but I'm happy to answer questions. And I don't know, Representative Theringer, if you have more comments, or Colleen, if you have anything you want to add. That's where we're at with CEA right now, though.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that, Josh.
Mhm.
Representative Theringer, do you have more that you want to share? Thoughts?
And I think, Josh highlighted at the beginning of the discussion just the challenge. Budgets are a super challenge right now, and that's going to be the issue. And the impact of both the transportation operating budget not doing well on the capital budget, as we've talked about that. So I think that's just, paramount is to going into this session is following the money and trying to manage the control the bleeding as much as possible, I guess.
Yeah. It's not going to be a fun session for those legislators that came on like maybe right before COVID and there was all this flush of money. It was, fairly fun to create new projects. And now that is absolutely gone and everything is oversubscribed and the state has to make cuts.
I am in hearing from the staff at the governor's office. Governor Ferguson is asking for a lot of white papers on what's going on each sort of program, and they are digging into it pretty deeply to see where they can maintain crucial services but cut some of the peripheral stuff and in all three budgets. I've obviously had some conversations around the capital budget. I think the capital budget will focus on state needs more than the peripheral things. And that means, our issue with juvenile detention facilities. We made a tour of one of the behavioral health hospitals last week with the capital budget. They have $22 million in plumbing that they have to look at, and also the state uh, Washington State Patrol's lab, right? Where all the DUIs and everything. That's really there's like a 230-day wait to get your DUI sample processed through the lab, and they're kind of just stacked up on each other. So things like that. I think the capital budget, at least coming out of the governor's office, is going to focus on some of those things, some of the needs the state has to make the state services more efficient and kind of get their jobs done in a more timely manner. So there's some capital needs there. And I think the capital budget writers, at least on the governor's side, will probably have that focus, which means there'll be less dollars, for some of these outlying community projects.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there's a question from Jim Hadwood in the chat. Are utility extensions to the EOC, Emergency Operations Center, and Edgewood Drive to Dry Creek on the list, sewer specifically? I wonder maybe Randy might have some information on that. I know that was not brought up as during our Clallam Economic Alliance meeting with Josh. That wasn't an item that was brought up as a particular need. So maybe that's in the STIP, the Surface Transportation Improvement Plan.
I think so, but the person that knows best would be Mike. He's been real close to it. Sorry, I can't really answer that. So,
Mike Chapman?
no, Mike French was following.
Mike French.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Got it. Great. Okay. Well, I don't see any more questions out there. So with that, Josh, thank you so much for joining us today. And Representative Theringer, great to see you. And I'm going to email you to get together with you for lunch soon. Everyone, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you being here. And this will be up on our website if you want to share it with anybody in the future. So thank you. And you've got 9 minutes back for your day. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
See everybody later.